Okay, we're now going to take a look at our last valuation method, and this one I'm going to present more of as just kind of an approximation tool. But it can be useful to let you know whether your estimate of a stock price is in the ballpark or whether there's any red flags that perhaps would indicate that a stock is way overpriced or way underpriced. Okay, this is the firm multiples method. In the firm multiples method, we're going to look at things like the PE ratio. That's the price to earnings ratio. And there are other things you could do, price to cash flow, price to sales. I'm going to focus in this example just on the price earnings ratio. I think that one is most often used when something like this is considered. The price earnings ratio, as you should know, is the price of the stock divided by the earnings per share. Earnings per share just being net income divided by shares outstanding. Okay, so if I rearrange this formula just a little bit and basically just multiply here by earnings per share, then what I'm going to get is the following. I'm going to have the price earnings ratio times earnings per share equals the price of the stock. Okay, the math there is pretty much unassailable. There's no argument about that. That's an identity. The price of the stock definitely equals the PE ratio times the earnings per share of that stock. And so what some people will do to try to estimate what the price should be is that they'll look at the industry and they'll see what is a typical or average PE ratio. And then they'll try to estimate what's the earnings per share likely to be in the near future for this company. And then they'll multiply the two to get the price. And as long as your estimates for these two are good, as long as you get earnings per share estimated really well, and you get a good number for a reasonable price earnings ratio, then you should have theoretically a good estimate of the price. Now there are issues that can come up with that. When you're estimating the price earnings ratio, how do you know that the industry average price earnings ratio is appropriate for your particular firm? Well, it may or may not be. And also there are different measures of earnings per share that can be used, and even the best Wall Street analyst will miss that forecast more times than not. Okay, but that is the idea anyway. We're going to estimate an appropriate PE ratio and then multiply by the expected earnings per share, and that gives us an estimate of the stock price. Even though it's not perfect, even though it's not really precise, it can give us a ballpark estimate, and it can help us to identify situations fairly quickly where a stock might be overpriced or underpriced. Alright, now I'd like to shift topics and talk a little bit about market equilibrium. When the market is in equilibrium, stock prices are stable, and I don't mean that they'll never change. But when I say that stock prices are stable, I mean that there's no compelling reason why people would want to buy versus sell. There's no compelling reason why people should be rushing to buy or rushing to sell, because the stock is priced fairly. The stock price is where it should be given the information that is available about the firm. So that's one of the two conditions here for equilibrium, actually, is that in equilibrium, the current stock price equals the intrinsic value. And recall that intrinsic value is not a fancy, mysterious term. It's not hard to understand. Intrinsic value just means what's the true value? What's the value of the stock as estimated by an intelligent person who has considered all the facts about the company and computed everything that's relevant, okay? So a fair value for the firm, and the stock price will be at that fair value, which is where it should be. Another thing we can say in equilibrium is that expected returns as might be measured by this formula in a constant growth setting, D1 over P0, that's the dividend yield, plus G, which is the capital gains yield, that's your expected returns. Those should be equal to the required returns as might be computed by something like the CAPM or the security market line equation. So, how is market equilibrium established? And more importantly, if you get away from market equilibrium, how do market forces begin to move things back to the equilibrium point, thereby reestablishing it? Okay, here's an example. Let's suppose that the price of a stock is below intrinsic value. What does that mean? It basically just says that the current price is too low. It's a bargain. It's below where it should be. This thing is on sale. And if a stock is on sale, if it is cheaper than it should be, then you're going to have buy orders greater than sell orders. You're going to have more eager buyers of the stock than eager sellers because it's cheap. People like to buy at low prices. They don't like to sell at low prices. Now, what's going to happen in a situation like that when you have a whole lot of eager buyers? Well, have you ever been at an auction or seen an auction when there's a lot of people bidding, a lot of people wanting to buy something? What happens to the price? The price is going to come up as a result of that until the expected return equals the required return again. That is one way to think of it. Because if you go back to the previous page, what happens as P0 comes up? What happens to expected return? Well, as P0 increases, the expected return is going to decrease, right? As P0, this denominator increases, the value of this entire expression, which is the expected return, will decrease, and it will come back down to where it's equal to the required return. All right. I'd like to work an example of something like this for you. And this is going to be from the homework, and at the time I'm recording this video, this is actually in the appendix to Chapter 9. If there are future versions of the text, it's possible that it might be back in the regular chapter or whatever, but wherever it is, it's a good example for us to look through. Here's some initial information about the problem. Stock C has a beta coefficient of 0.4. and stock D has a beta coefficient of negative 0.5. I'm not particularly worried about stock D in this example. I'm more concerned with stock C because that's the one we're going to focus on in this equilibrium context. So remember that the beta of stock C is 0.4. Now let's take a look here at some more information. The risk-free rate is 7%. and the expected return on an average stock is 11%. What's the required return on stock C? You could do stock D also, but like I said, I'm worried more about stock C for this example. Okay, remember the security market line equation. We have the required return on the stock equals the risk-free rate plus the difference between the market return and the risk-free return times the beta of the stock. Okay, and in this case, it does say that the risk-free return is 7%. And it says that the expected rate of return on an average stock is 11%. That's another way of saying that the market rate of return is 11%. It's just the expected return or the required return on an average stock, or you could say on the overall market. It didn't say anything about it being a risk premium on the market, so that would be a different deal. But this is just the average return on the market of 11%. And then we subtract off the risk-free rate, and then it does say that the beta of stock C is 0.4. So, just simplifying a little bit, 11 minus 7 is 4, and then multiplying 4% times 0.4 is 1.6%, and that's going to give us 8.6%, or in decimal form 0.086. Alright, so we've answered the first part of the question, and that's nothing new. This is nothing that we haven't done already. But the next part is going to be very related to what we just talked about, but introduce the idea of what happens to bring things to equilibrium if we get there. Okay, so let's look at the next part. It says, for stock C, suppose the current market price is $25. And the next expected dividend, D1, is $1.50, and the stock's expected constant growth rate is 4%. Is the stock in equilibrium? And if not, explain what will happen. Okay, how do we know if the stock is in equilibrium? Well, there are a couple of methods. The easiest one, I think, and the one that I use in this situation, is to figure out from my information, what should the stock's price be? I know it says here that it is $25. That's fine, but what should it be? Should it be 25? Should it be higher? Should it be lower? That will answer the question, because we do have the information to figure that out. Okay, the price of the stock, P0, should be determined in a constant growth setting by this formula, D1 over RS minus G. And D1 is given as $1.50. The required return was calculated in the previous step, right, as 8.6%, and then the growth rate is expected to be 4% long term. Okay, so we have $1.50 divided by, if we take that difference up there and we simplify this part, it's going to be 0.046, and so just getting my calculator, I'm going to see that I have $1.50 divided by 0.046, which gives me $32.61. Alright, what we just computed there is how much the stock should be selling for. This is what it's really worth. This is actually the intrinsic value, $32.61. So going back to the question, it is selling for 25. So is it overvalued? Is it undervalued? Clearly it's not in equilibrium, because the stock price should be $32.61 as we calculated over here. But it isn't $32.61. It's too low. $25 is too low. The current stock price is lower than it should be based on what we know about it. And so this stock is undervalued. It is not in equilibrium. It is undervalued. And what happens to a stock that is undervalued? Well, it won't stay that way for long. The price will come up. Price will rise on an undervalued stock and eventually restore equilibrium, just like we explained in the lecture slide a moment ago. Had the stock been overvalued, so let's say that instead of being at 25, it was way up at 50 per share. That would have been too high. Then we would have expected market forces to bring the price back down. So if we're away from the equilibrium price of $32.61 for whatever reason, the market will begin to act to bring things back. Market forces, just normal buying and selling, will immediately act to bring the price back toward its equilibrium value of, in this case, $32.61.